Well, thank you all for a wonderful summary of what has transpired and what I think has been an exciting day and a quarter. So I'd like to open the final session up for questions. Feel free to go to the microphone, tell us who you are and where you're from. And those online should send their questions to the chat box. Torbjörn.
So I'm Torbjörn Kronander, Sectra, coming in from a public health system in Sweden. And it's been a great days. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's been really, really encouraging here. I have one comment though. I have a completely different background from most of you, mathematics. Now, when you look at disparity, and that's a very sensitive area, right? You see different race or whatever, zip codes, should be kind of equivalent, have the same amount in the data collection amounts. If you know the data, you want the same amount of blacks and whites and so on to take that disparity away. But if the probability of breast cancer, for instance, between blacks and whites are different, that's an opportunity. It's not a problem. And you see it as a problem. I see that if the probabilities are different, you should feed the artificial networks with that data. You should feed race. Now, that's very, very sensitive. In Sweden, it's not even allowed by law to register such things in the EMRs, for instance. But it's an opportunity to get better outcome from the AI for both sides, both groups. And this, I think, you need a little more decision theory sometimes in this community, because it would improve the outcome both for the white group and the black group if you fed that into the networks. So that's an observation from my standpoint coming from telecommunications. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Gwen Darian, National Patient Advocate Foundation. So this is an evolving thought and something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, talking to Rob a lot about. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday. We know there are disparities. There have been disparities forever. AI doesn't create disparities. I think the really serious challenge is how to stop it from just perpetuating disparities. And there was some, there's been some really interesting work about EHRs and what happens when things are perpetuated and brought from one EHR to the next EHR. So I think it's really about perpetuating. It's not just about creating and not just about eliminating. And then I think the other issue that people talk about a lot is whether the representative, that it's not about race, it's about all of these other things, but it's about racism. It's about the socio-political context. So if we can broaden that lens a little bit to look at how race, ethnicity, identity, socioeconomic status impact racism, bias, socio-political context, I think we can have a really nuanced discussion about this that will move us forward rather than just having us have the same conversations about how we are going to reduce disparities and only focusing on creating, not dismantling, and and getting rid of the perpetuation of the bias in the system.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Dr. Schulman.
Yeah, hi, Larry Schulman from University of Pennsylvania. This has been a really, really exciting and inspiring day and a half, and I'm just hoping that in the years to come, the few years I have left, that I'll see some of these come to fruition, because we need it so badly. I did want to emphasize something that Aman said, which is remember that none of this will pay dividends unless the end users can use this when they sit down in a room with patients, right? That's how care is still delivered and likely to be still delivered. And we've done, I think, in medicine, not a great job at displaying critical information in ways that is most usable, sort of so-called human-centered design that other industries have done. You know, you get into a cockpit of a jetliner, which is an incredibly complicated machine, but all the critical data is right in front of the pilot, unobstructed by data that's not critical. They've got everything they need to safely fly the plane, and the safety record for the airline industry is spectacular. In medicine, not so much. And we know how many errors are made and how many lives are lost. And Hetty, you commented about how this has the opportunity to improve care and improve quality, but that's only going to be the case if, in fact, we redesign how we display information to clinicians. And the risk always is when we have more information, that display is going to get more complicated and less easy to use. And so I think that we could probably do a better job with design experts on how to really help clinicians to have what they need to have. Everything needs to be in the background if you need to look at it, just like all those switches in the roof of the plane. But you need the critical data right in front of people. We don't do a good job of that yet.
So, Larry, they are not in the room, but there are a few manufacturers that are actually in the field of radiology, that their new design of the dashboards with the display of the key clinical findings, it's really much improved what it was 5 years ago. But you are absolutely right. The design is critical also for integrated diagnostics. How are we going to display? How can you go back and double check? Because it's not going to be some people say it will be automated tumor boards 10 years. We'll see about that. But for the long time, you want to go back and check. So you are absolutely right. And we'll make sure that that goes in the policy, really the design. Thank you.
Hetty, I just wanted to add on to that, and I think it addresses both Larry's point and Gwen's point, and the importance of having stakeholders involved as we would roll out a new technology using AI, integrated diagnostics, whether it's hearing from the community to build trust, understanding that implementation science, hearing from them about just hearing from all communities, whether they're rural, whether they're different ethnicities or race, what does it take to understand the AI, ChatGPT, and I think for us as clinicians who are in the room with the patient, how quickly can we see it as easily, as clearly as possible to have that patient-centric, shared decision-making approach using the best technology that can improve outcomes. So thank you. Those are both great points.
Joe Leonard.
Hi, Joe from Mass General. A quick comment. So I think it's great to say that we have an aspirational goal when talking about integrated diagnostics, that we want a national healthcare system or a one-payer operation, but I think that's not quite realistic. Maybe as a quick pointer on how to create incentives that actually work is to talk to your payer operations team, because many payers have implemented already so-called care pathways, where certain combinations of procedural codes are incentivized to get extra payment if they are conducted in a timely fashion, and that comes with a ding if you don't do that in a timely fashion. That is a very concrete sort of homework task if you're really interested in implementing it, to talk to your payer operations team and see some of these policies that payers have that work across disciplines. I think that may be a little bit more of an achievable goal rather than just to throw out there, if someone would pay for everything, that would be great. I think it's those tiny steps forward that may help us and realize integrated diagnostics.
Thanks, Joe. I'll react to that. I think what happens right now is most of us have conversations with our payers, and that leads to a lack of uniformity in the manner in which such policies end up being enacted in the different regions. So in your part of the country or in your work environment, you have a particular market share that puts you in a position that may be a stronger negotiating position because of the number of patients that are seen within your system than somebody else in a smaller system. So I'm just trying to contrast the ability to what you're able to engineer as a result of your market position versus what might be achievable if you had something as a generally applied policy across the board. And I think that's part of why we have lack of uniformity, even for the tests that we currently have now and how they're reimbursed.
Just a quick comment. I think there's a top-down and a bottom-up approach. I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. Local coverage policy can drive national coverage policy and vice versa. So you can approach a complicated topic like this by saying national coverage determination should incentivize, let's call it integrated diagnostics for lung cancer. That's an absolute fair point, but that comes with certain requirements. Let's say FDA approval or breakthrough designation. At the same time, both the bottom-up works as well. So a carefully constructed coverage or even an appeal policy for certain things locally can create the blueprint that would drive, let's say, state level or supra-state level initiatives. And, you know, the MACs cover certain things and they have the right to diversify coverage, which I think is a good thing because not everything is ready to go, as we pointed out.
I think this is great that we're discussing opportunities to untangle the Gordian knot that we've all had to deal with, and the solutions that we currently have are currently individualized, is the point. For us to be able to deliver care at scale, we'll need to come up with cross-cutting policies that are accessible to everyone, not just the people who have the biggest market share and are in a strong position and have the levers to, shall we say, move the payers from their position. So everything you've described, we've done. But that also leads to patches that some have described as, well, I like to describe as coverage deserts.
Absolutely.
I would just add that we had a great example from Dr. Labasada regarding using the inpatient environment as an initial testing bed for integrated diagnostics, given its DRG-focused reimbursement pattern, reducing length of stay, decreasing costs in the hospital, avoiding complications, avoiding readmissions. It is one of the few environments in healthcare today where we are already in a bundled payment model for that, and could continue to be an area of innovation in integrated diagnostics without having to address some of the harder problems which in the ambulatory setting continue to face us from a payer reimbursement perspective.
Dr. Jensen?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Joel said, and from a practical standpoint, you know, day-to-day operations standpoint, that's the world that we live in, and we just have to accept it. But what I would emphasize is that way too often we work on building a better iron lung instead of a polio vaccine.
Anand?
I want to make a comeback back to the prior question about user-centered design. So, you know, we had a question that, or an example that came up yesterday as well of where a message went out in a patient portal to the patient around prostate cancer. And so I think as we think about the user-centered design, that's also an important piece of this is how it faces both the clinician who has to make the decision around diagnosis and then potentially plan treatment, but then how that's immediately being reported to the patient, because that's what's happening now. So we need both a way to aid the clinician and then yet keep it simple enough so that the patient can understand and actually frame then, the patient should be driving what is the outcomes regarding diagnosis and treatment that should be driven. It's all somewhat complicated, but we have sciences across, as we talked about in these last 2 days, to help inform that user-centered design, and I'm just seconding what you'd said earlier.
Dr. Wiener?
Yeah, so maybe just to follow up on that, this should be something that AI could do quite easily. Take the path report and convert it into lay language. I don't think we talked about that much, but that it should should be fairly straightforward.
But it's also about actionability that helps guide effective treatment. So you have to be careful of just getting it out in plain language. It has to be in a way that guides decisions without also alarming the patient too much.
Yeah, but
from an
I
emotional
think you could have
perspective.
two versions. You could have the medical version, and then you could have the lay version.
So I just want to say, there's a lot of people looking at this, and it's just not easy. But it doesn't impossible. It's just, it's bringing together the fields that do this. Remember, the internet, it does what it does because they've had people looking at this for so long. And make it easy for people to do what they need you to do.
Dr. Osterman, looks like you're walking up to the mic.
So one of the things I sometimes joke about tongue-in-cheek with my medical students is, as a thoracic oncologist, we don't have any whodunits, or we have very few whodunits, because the pathologists have already done all the work by the time they come to me. And so when we think about integrated diagnostics here, where do we draw the line of where integrated diagnostics ends and all of the other very closely related topics begin? This is an extension really on the question of access. I think we have a lot of patient-facing translation that just came up. How do you scope this so that we can actually push integrated diagnostics forward?
So that was a great question. It's a definition of scope. In order that it might achieve one of our stated goals, which is being able to offer patients the best care for whatever their condition is. I think it can't be all things to all people. I think staying focused on being able to harness all of the modalities that are currently measured that tell us more accurately about what kind of cancer the patient has, our patient-stated goals, our patient-driven goals, how much of it is there, how do they get treated, is a great start. And if we can do that at scale, it'll be informative for each individual patient. I think that's one way to manage the enormity of the situation that patients in this condition confront.
So, Travis, what you just asked, and it's excellent, it's really the scope of CDS. And now the new generation is CCDS, computerized clinical decision support. Unfortunately, even in this country, we don't have any vendors in the room to give, but even in this country, only 40%, 40, of the hospitals have CDS. So this is something that, and many have home-built CDS. And home-built CDS, it's wonderful the first 6 months, but then nobody updates and nobody puts new functionality in it. So that's something. I mean, there was the entire NAM workshop on CDS. Happy to send you you can just download it. But that is where the really many things we discussed are the part of that circle of CDS.
Question from Rob Wynn.
Yeah, this is more of a comment, and I would like to have a response. I think that as I push my own data people, I think we conflate useful versus usable quite often, even at the beginning of the discussions. And as I think about this, it comes back to the fact that I remind my data people that useful it's fit for a purpose, right? But that's not the same as fit to be used. And so I think part of the conversations that I would hope that we also take away from this in the context of maybe shaping policy or figuring out what's useful. Most data people think everything is useful as everything. So I pointed out to one of my data people. I say, you know what? A hammer has a purpose, but it's not so usable when I'm swimming, right? And so this is a concept that some of your data and what you're thinking about your data systems and all the rest of that may be useful to some, but I don't think that you're at the outset thinking about the usability of our communities, the usability as me, just as a physician, or scientists and what have you. So I just think that I hope that as we continue to have these conversations, you're able to tease out when you're talking about the usefulness of something versus the usability, because they're not actually always the same.
Amen. Well, I'd like to see you find some use for a hammer while swimming. Dr. Herbst.
But can I say something to that? Because there is discovery, and then there is usefulness. So as a data person, yeah, I love data. I love to but sometimes I can figure out things that you don't even know are a question. So we need to balance that. We need to be useful, and I'm not arguing that has to be our goal, but there also has to be the curiosity to still have discovery.
Oh, no doubt. And this is bigger than that, right? Because we actually, as Harold P. Freeman once sort of identified the critical disconnect in health. We do a lot of discovering, but that doesn't cross the bridge to implementation, which is why some of my communities in Danville, Virginia, and actually in some Lynchburg, Virginia, some of my small towns in Petersburg are not benefiting from our discoveries. So I just caution us all. That's why I really think about the useful discovery, usefulness, and at the end, the usability, and actually having people figure out, I mean, this whole thing about the digital data desert, how are you going to address that? It's not going to be just from a new discovery. It's from the actual putting into operation a plan of workforces and approaches to address that. And so the funny part about this is I think we're at a point where we now understand that a peanut butter sandwich by itself may be good, but peanut and jelly is even better. And what I'm saying is that discovery and the implementation, discovery and the usability, we should be thinking about in parallel.
Yeah, Coach Nancy here. Is there a possibility that I could bring to you a question from somebody online because I'm monitoring the chat?
Yes, please.
Is that okay? All righty. So I have a question here from Tommy Wang, who's at the Moore Foundation Moore Foundation. And one of the things he asked was, if we do need robust clinical trials, what types of adaptation modernizations are needed for the clinical trial infrastructure in these new use cases, especially if you focus on AI and machine learning and strong clinical workflow integration needs? Did you get that okay?
Yes, we did. And looks like Dr. Naik is self-nominating to respond.
Thanks.
So it came up a little bit in one of our conclusions. So thinking really about hybrid designs, clinical trial designs. And so as you think about the algorithm, what are the components, both in terms of hardware and in terms of the people and the processes, and how those things are married together? And that gets back to actually your usability question. So what can people process effectively in a timely manner? And you have to sort of, I think in the trial, that's what your intervention is. It's not just the algorithm and the software. It is also the people, the processes, the hardware that goes around it. And you should trial the whole thing as a bundled package. And then within context, you should trial it at multiple sites because it's going to vary a little bit by context. And that should be a variable too in your trial is to agree to which that package is implemented the same way across every site.
So you also wanted to know whether you think all these things are going to have to be like prospective randomized trials or whether there's another way to do this.
Roy, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I was going to comment. I think, I would agree we need to set up a network of trials that gets to all parts of the country, to the world. And, the buzzword now is pragmatic, trials that really only look for the key data elements, trials that can be done at community sites. I think it's a big initiative from the FDA, the NCI, and that's certainly something where as long as we can collect some of these data, they can be used and many of the techniques we heard about at this meeting could be implemented. I was going to ask a different question. It's been a great meeting, and it's a tough funding climate right now from the government. Inflation is high. It's hard to believe that the budget will be that much increased. We'd be happy just to have the same budget. So this ARPA-H money is sitting there, and it's not been used yet, and there's a lot of it. So I just wanted to ask, we heard from ARPA-H today. Many of us are with cancer centers. We heard that the catchments don't cover the entire country. So I was just wondering from the panel, how could we use some of those resources and do a demonstration project or pull some of the things we heard about together to try to get out to the community, and what would be it'd be nice to sort of push that agenda a little bit.
So I can tell you a little bit, maybe I know too, about ARPA age. It's only recently that they put up on their website how to apply. That's now number one. Number two, I find they are very open to discussion and suggestions. And we just talked briefly during the coffee break. I really do think we need to put a group. I know they're interested in integrated diagnostics. She didn't put a group together. Somebody has to write up a proposal. It doesn't, and maybe divide how to write those proposals, but I don't think that's a part of annual. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a representative who can speak to it with some authority.
Some authority. So at this point, we're very excited to have conversations around concept papers. So we are not formally soliciting. As you can imagine, with an agency with $2.5 billion, we will at some point soon be soliciting. But at this point, we're very happy to talk with individuals or with teams the same framework that we look for from applicants to kind of explain what it is you're doing, what's the state of the art, why could this only be done at ARPA-H and not be done by another mechanism? Because again, it's $2.5 billion, but we're 4 or 5% the budget of NIH, right? So we're still relatively small, and we have to have a clear justification about why we can do this in the ARPA framework, why it shouldn't be done in an existing model like NCI's, and what sort of capability we're going to get to at the end. But I think the way that this conversation has gone around integrated diagnostics, we are clearly aiming for a capability. So I think that it's a worthwhile conversation that we're very happy to have.
Thank you very much for that. Just to respond to the previous question that came from the chat box, I think that Nancy had asked, it'll be necessary to do some prospective studies, but at the scale that's necessary to demonstrate that the existing data that we have may actually be translatable. It seems as though some retrospective work would have to be done because that's what we have the immediate outcomes for. And on the basis of those, we can probably make even more strategic and pragmatic designs for prospective work. Otherwise, there's no way to demonstrate that the experiment would actually work. So that's one way to think about it. Mia?
I would also just invite us to consider evaluations that can lead specifically to reimbursement. I think so many of us have done demonstration projects at the local level, and yes, we could influence local coverage determinations, and maybe that could lead to a national coverage determination. But an actual, what scale do we need? How broad of a distribution within the country in order to move that needle so that we can move to a payer model for an example that's integrated diagnostics.
100% agree with that. Nancy, any other questions?
No, nothing else that I see in the chat. Thanks.
All right. Well, it looks like we've solved every problem. But I'd like to round up by thanking everyone, thanking the participants, thanking my co-chair, thanking the panelists. This has been effectively a labor of love for many members of the NCPF over the last year and a half to 2 years to bring this to fruition. I think you'll agree that the outcomes are very stimulating conversation, important discussion about how we can actually come up with policy that will shape the way patient outcomes are driven by integrated diagnostics. So I wanted to thank everybody for their participation.